The from creation operator lets you, as the name implies, create an observable from nearly anything. An array-like object, an iterable, or even a promise. Let's check out an example of each to better understand how this works. Let's actually begin with the first example from the previous lesson using of to understand how it compares. If you recall, of simply takes the values you supply and emits them in sequence. So for this example, it will loop through our values and emit each number 1 through 5. The from operator is a little different in that instead of just emitting whatever values you supply as is, it checks for the type of value it receives and emits items in a way that makes the most sense for that item type. In a way, it's like a more intelligent of operator. To see what I mean, let's add from to our imports now. So for example, if we wanted to mimic the current behavior using of, we could wrap these arguments in an array. When from sees an array, behind the scenes it just loops through emitting the items the same as of with the arguments you supply. And when we refresh we can see that's exactly the case, the numbers 1 through 5 are emitted. As a point of comparison, if we swap this back out with of, you will see just the array being emitted as a whole. Let's keep going to see how this works with other item types. The first is the handling of an array-like object, or essentially any item it receives with a length property. For these cases, from emits each index in sequence, just like an array. So, for instance, if I swap out the array for a string instead, from will emit each character individually. When I refresh, we can see each character from the word hello logged to the console. The next item from can convert into an observable is a promise. To test this, let's actually use fetch and GitHub's public API for a more real-world example. So instead of a string here, we are going to call fetch, which returns a promise. And we'll pass the URL to make a GET request, retrieving details for the Octocat user. Behind the scenes, from will recognize that this is a promise and call .then, invoking your next callback and completing on success, and forwarding the error in case of an error. So when we save, we can see the response being logged by our next method, then the observable completing. The last unique item I want to look at using from is iterators. For this, let's actually use a generator function. So I'll go ahead and create a generator function, and let's call it hello. And we'll have it yield the words hello and then world. If you're not familiar, generators return an iterator which has a next method, allowing you to pull values out one at a time. So for instance, let's create a variable called iterator, and we'll invoke the generator function. Next, let's add a console.log to log the first value when we call iterator.next. Let's also comment out our subscription for a second to keep the console clear. When we save, we can see the word hello log to the console. If I were to copy this and log the next value, we will now see the words hello and world logged as we are pulling out both values from the iterator. So instead of logging these values to the console by calling next on the iterator, let's pass it to from and let it do the work for us. Anytime an iterator is received, from will drop it in a do-while loop, calling next on the iterator and emitting each value until there's none left before completing. So let's go ahead and uncomment our subscription, and when we refresh, we can see the observable emits every value within the iterable before completing. To recap, the from creation operator lets you create an observable from, well, nearly anything. It's worth noting that down the road when we start getting into flattening operators, if you ever wonder how these operators may flatten a non-observable response, you can always look back at this lesson and how from converts that item type as an answer to your question. The helper method that's used behind the scenes for both scenarios is exactly the same.